So welcome to this lesson where we're going to take a look at developing the header, and the header is one of the most important parts to a front end. So with the header, it's very clean and simple. Now obviously the more complex the front end is, the more complex your actual header will be, but in our case it's fairly simple. We just have a few links at the top, and don't forget we also have that little indicator. But also we must think about mobile responsiveness. So when it shrinks down, what I plan to do is just have one link strapped along the top that says menu, and when you click on the menu it will open and close the menu, or just toggle it. So what I'm going to do now is start to develop this in the HTML, CSS, and also there's going to be a little bit of JavaScript in here as well. So firstly, what you must remember is that with the header.php, it's being included in the dashboard.php, profile.php, and all the other pages. But really, all it should contain is the markup just for the menu, just the HTML. But I'm having to include the head.php only for development, so whilst I'm just developing it in here, until we're ready to embed it into other pages. The reason being is because the head.php is already included in the dashboard, profile, and so forth and so on with those pages. So we don't need to include it twice. This should just include the HTML, plus the fact you shouldn't be linking to CSS files and also JavaScript files as well in the body, which is where this file is going to be included. So just for now, we are going to include the head.php so we can target all the CSS files and JavaScript files that are necessary. You'll also notice we have script.js that's loaded up, and we can use jQuery inside of there, so that's what we're going to do, but we're going to leave that for now until the end. And the first thing we need to do is take a look at generating the markup that's needed for this header. So firstly, what we're going to do is have an anchor that is going to only show when it's in mobile mode, effectively when it's so small that we're just going to have one main anchor at the top, and that's going to toggle open and closed all of those links. So let's go ahead and put that in. I'm just going to say anchor. It's going to link to nowhere, and it's going to have an ID so I can refer to it in the CSS and JavaScript as well, and that's going to be header_open. Inside of there we're going to have a span, which is just going to be a nice little icon, and it's capital B, and again we're using the Liger font right here. It's just a menu icon, and you'll be able to see it later on. And then the text is just going to be menu. So as I said, that's just going to be hidden by default on larger resolution devices, but on low resolution devices like tablets and smartphones, that link will be visible. Then also what we want to have is a div element with the ID of header, and inside of there we want 5 links, and inside of those we want a span. So the span is effectively going to be the icons right here. And then what I can do is make these all a dummy link, and then we can start to fill in the span. So for each individual icon, again what you can do is copy and paste. So for example, I could copy that and paste it in if I'm unsure what character it is, so the @ symbol produces that glyph, and then also I can put in the text home. So what I want to do now is finish that off. And there we go, I've filled that all in for you. And the next thing that we want to do is take a look at the styling. So you can see here that we're already importing the import.scss, giving us access to those variables and mixins. So the first port of call that I want to do is get rid of the header open link, because by default we don't want it. We only want to show it when the screen resolution goes to a certain size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to target the header_open ID and simply say display as none. And we'll look at the styling later on. But right now we just want to hide it just like so. Now the next thing I want to do is actually take a look at the main header div. So firstly I'm going to set the float to the left, and you're probably going, why are you actually doing that? Because you don't want content to the right hand side of it. Well, the reason why we're going to do that is because let's say we had this on a page, let's say the events page, and with this left-hand column, this div is also going to be set to float to the left. And what you'll normally find is if you can't understand why there's a space, there's no margin there and so forth, there's no padding that's creating a space between two elements, it's usually because you haven't set the float. Also, the float can also help with inline elements, particularly with the icons and so forth, which we'll discover later on. But this is why when you have spacing anomalies or styling anomalies, usually it's due to the float not being set. So always remember to put your float on there. And then also what we have is the width set to 100%. That way nothing can go to the right or to the left of this particular div element. Then also we're going to set the background color to brown. So go ahead and save that and hit refresh. And now what I want to do is take a look at styling up all of those anchors that are nested inside of the header. So these anchors are going to need to have a little bit of mass on here. So I just want to set this to display as an inline block. Then also I want to tell them to float to the left, again to get rid of any spacing anomalies. Then also I want to set the padding top and bottom to 0. I'm not interested in the padding top and bottom, but I'm going to set the padding left and right to 15 pixels, effectively pushing the text away from the left and right edges. But what about the height? Well, again, we're going to set the line height to 50 pixels. That way it'll make our header bigger as well as the links being bigger, and it'll also center up the text vertically in the center, which is what we want. Then also I'm going to set the font size to 18 pixels. Then we have the font color. So the font color is going to be text 2, which is the white text color. And then finally we have the mix-in transition. So again, this will allow it to animate between the normal state and the hover state and so forth. So I'm just going to say include transition, and we want to transition all available CSS properties, which effectively in this case we're only animating the background color and the font color, and we want to do that within 0.3 of a second, or 300 milliseconds. So once I've done that, let's go ahead and save it now and hit refresh. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at the actual positioning of the first and last link, because as you know, the last link needs to go over to the right and the first link needs to have a little bit more spacing right there on the left edge. Just push it away a little bit. So the way we're actually going to do that is we're going to target the ID header, then we're going to target the anchor, and let's start out with the first anchor. So I'm going to use the selector first hyphen child. So that's going to select the first child in the div element with the ID of header, so it's this one right here. And then what I can do is set the padding left to 20 pixels. Now let's take a look at the last child, so the very last anchor. So again, we're looking inside of the element with the ID of header, then we're looking at all of the anchors, but then what we're doing is we're saying we don't want to look at all the anchors, we just want to look at a specific one, and instead of saying first, we're just going to say last. Now also, to make this balance out, because this is going to be floating over to the right side, we also need to move it in on the right edge. So instead of saying padding left, we're going to say right, and even though it's 5 pixels, I know, it still does make a bit of a difference. And then what I want to do is obviously tell it to float to the right hand side, and once I do that, just save it now, and you'll notice the log out goes over to the right edge. So that's looking really good. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at styling up the spans that reside in those anchors. So we want to target the header, and then we want to target all of the spans. I mean, we don't have to be specific because all the spans are going to be styled exactly the same. So I'm going to set the font family to Liger. And then also what I want to do is set the padding right to 7 pixels. So what that will actually do is it will move it away from the text. So if I just hit refresh right now, you'll notice the font family has changed and it's just moving it away from the text a little bit. Now what I can do is take a look at the hover state of our anchors. So I can say header A, and then we're going to the hover state, and don't forget these are going to be animated right here. So I'm going to set the background color to yellow and the text color to text 1, which is going to be the brown text color. So let's save that now and hit refresh, and there you go. You'll now notice we get this nice transition. Now you may not have noticed that with this anchor we have this 1 right here, and that is this element right here, this EM. Now EM, as I've always said, is not necessarily larger text or even italic text and so forth. EM is just emphasized text. So if I was to log in first of all, that would immediately catch my eye because that's something that you'd look at. And even though it may be little, it's still emphasized to me. So that's why I'm using the EM. I mean, there's a whole host of other elements that you could use, small and so forth. But I like EM because I still think that this is emphasized. So what I'm going to do now is take a look at styling up this EM. Also, don't forget, do not put the EM inside of the span, because if you do, it's going to change the font family, and that's not something that we want. So put the EM outside of the span. So now let's take a look at the styling for that specific element. So we're going to target the header, and then we're going to target the EM, because that's the only element that's inside of there of that particular type. And then what I can do is say display as an inline block, because we want this to actually have a little bit of mass, and we want the positioning to be absolute. The reason being is because it needs to overlap over other elements, so that's why we're setting the positioning to absolute. Then also we're going to set the line height to 12 pixels, so this will actually set the height and also align the text vertically in the center. Then also what we have is the padding, so it's going to be 0 for the top and the bottom, and then we want 3 pixels to the left and to the right to make sure that the text doesn't touch the edge. And again, we need to make sure this is really legible, so that's why we've got to move it away from the edges. Then also we have the margin right here. Now again, I've played around with these values, but these values have worked for me. So it's going to be 12 pixels down from the top. Then also we have 0 for the right and bottom. We're not bothered about those margins. And then negative 12 pixels on the left margin. So what that will do is it will take the EM and it will push it over to the left, and it will overlap the span, just like we have in the Photoshop version. And you do not want to be setting top, left, right, bottom. You want to be setting the margins, because then the element will respect the parent's boundaries, because we're working with position absolute. You set it to left negative 12, it's actually going to go off the left hand side of the page because it doesn't respect the boundaries of the parent. So always remember, use the margins instead. Then also we want to set the background color to red, and we also want to set the font color to text 2, which is going to be the white text color. Then also the text alignment is going to be in the center. Then also we're going to have the font style, because as you can see, this is a little bit italic right here, and the browser likes to add its own styling in there. So I'm just going to say font style is normal. That way it will get rid of those italics. Then also we have the font size, which is not going to be very big. It's going to be 9 pixels. Then we have the font weight. I'm going to set that to bold, so we're making it more legible. And then also we're going to have the border radius. So again, I'm going to use my mix-ins. So I'm going to say border radius, and it's going to be 2 pixels on all edges. So it's only tiny, but it still makes a difference. And then to give it more emphasis, what we want to do is use the box shadow mix-in. And it's going to have a 1 pixel offset on the X and the Y. Then it's going to have 2 pixels blur. And then we're going to set the RGBA color value. And it's going to be black. And it's going to be at 0.7 or 70% alpha transparent. So then I'm just going to close that off, just like so, and just hit refresh. And now you'll notice there it is, and it looks so clean and nice. So thank you for watching this lesson, and join me in the next lesson where we'll continue on developing the header.